Working with patients all the time, they come in with bloating, reflux, constipation, fatigue, brain fog, all those things we see patients with all the time.
Right.
But they're told their labs are normal and nothing's wrong. But from your data, how often is that microbiome already dysfunctional years before conventional medicine finally calls it a disease?
I don't think we have that data yet because remember, the microbiome is at its infancy. But, we've definitely seen some signals in Parkinson's, in Alzheimer's, that I believe occur at least 20 years earlier. So when you think about, Parkinson's, the symptom of Parkinson's, before the person starts having neurological problems, they start having constipation 20 years prior. So the symptoms in the digestive tract can be your first hint. So when you look at the microbiome and you see a dysbiosis, that's already a hint. When people come to me with long COVID or, all sorts of, issues that just happened in the last 4 years, when I take their history, there's always a story there, right? Think about the person like just yesterday. I had a woman that basically could not get out of bed. And, when you take her history, it started with the appendicitis 30 years ago. The appendix is the reservoir that holds the original microbiome of infancy, right? So she lost her appendix. Then she started on this, antibiotic crave. And then that killed her microbiome. Then she started with Lyme disease. Then she started with chronic fatigue syndrome. And so all these things, if you look back at the history and you take a history from a patient, it doesn't start overnight. It's been accumulating till the point where it's that domino effect, right? Where you have like one piece of the domino that falls, hits another one and another one and another one. And eventually the whole set is down, right? So it is that. In the microbiome space, I like to think of it as the last microbe standing, right? So when we think about bifidobacteria, my whole slogan and mission is save the BIF, right? Why? Because I've noticed even since 2019, when we started all this, that there's a decrease in bifidobacteria across the line from patients in 2019 to 2020 to 21 to 22. Now, whatever's causing that, whether the stress of the pandemic, COVID, the vaccines, all that, you have to kind of ask questions. What is going on? So imagine you've got 1 million bifidobacteria. Now they drop to 500 and 400, 300 till you have like one left. It's like that little bug standing on its own, supposed to fight all these viruses that are coming at you. That's how I look at it. Now, that's not how all of medicine looks at it. And a lot of doctors, doctors follow guidelines. We've lost, what's sad, and I realized that during the pandemic, is we've lost the critical thinking of doctors. We've lost the art of medicine. And unfortunately, when you lose that critical thinking, that being a detective, that questioning the data, questioning the science, you lose medicine. And when you lose the art of medicine, you lose innovations. And when you lose innovations, you lose the patient. I'm sorry. We saw that during COVID. And I think, it's as sad as it hurts me to see my profession die. And I know I've seen things, people go into computers and AI tells them everything about them and gives them a cookie cutter protocol. But, AI is flawed. AI does not have proper judgment. And I'll give you a proper example. I showed an X-ray to AI. It completely missed the diagnosis. Why? Because it does not have my knowledge of 30 years of doing clinical medicine, where I see these one cases, of strongyloides, for example, that basically occur, or, weird parasites or weird infiltration or weird carcinoids. It does not have that ability to think critically. So if we're counting on a computer to fix us, and, we've lost medicine. So much of medicine, I have this discussion with my colleagues, is really the art of holding the hand of a patient. It's the art of giving hope. It's the art of taking history. It's the art of turning my patient into a warrior so they can survive.
I could not agree with you. As interviewing many functional medicine providers, the common theme comes back to that loss of that relationship with the patient. And you have to have a relationship because it's not a speed date. Unfortunately, that's the way medicine is nowadays because the insurance model, it's not a speed date. It's a relationship. It takes time. And you're right. The good clinicians that work on root cause, look at all those things, dial in and say, hey, let's start here. Let's get a plan. Because when it looks at root cause, there isn't a magic bullet or a magic supplement or a magic drug that fixes the problems. And you just nailed it. It's finding those key things. Now, going back to that, the way you see the microbiome, that is like an untreated therapeutic target that just gets missed by conventional medicine. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's expensive. It's an expensive tool. It's not validated yet. In other words, nobody really knows what they're seeing. What microbe is good, what microbe is bad. There's trillions of microbes out there. I'm literally sitting on the CBC. When you have a patient that's bleeding and we do a CBC. Imagine in the 1800s when CBC was not around, how did they fix those GI bleeders, right? So I'm sitting on the exact same thing as the hemoglobin, right? So patient is bleeding. I have a hemoglobin. Now I know hemoglobin of 6, and below, I transfuse. Hemoglobin of 7 and above, I observe. And I follow the hemoglobin, right? Now, here's the thing. I transfuse, but I know how to transfuse blood now, right? I know what tubes to put in. I know everything that needs to be done. In the microbiome space, we have no idea what is the hemoglobin yet. I think I have an idea, but it needs a lot of people to kind of like look at it and validate my work and reproduce my work. But the other thing is the hemoglobin itself. Like, let's say I find a microbe that's out of balance and I want to replenish. How long do I replenish it till? Where does the balance cut off, right? Who's my normal? Who do I look to kind of say, this is my normal patient, right? And therefore, I'm going to mimic everything of that normal patient. Who's my normal? So there's a lot of challenges. And also, we're all different. I'm from Morocco. I always like to joke and say, born in the desert of Morocco. I'm exposed to microbes that live in the desert, right? So I'm pretty resilient up to a point, right? Now I come to America, I've changed my microbiome, right? Now, is my microbiome matching an American or a person from the Amazon jungle or a person from China? Probably not. I go to China and I'm always super sick when I eat the food there. So my body tells me, hey, this is not compatible to you. You're flushing, you're either vomiting or having diarrhea. That's your body telling you these microbes are foreign. We don't want them, right? So I think there's a compatibility issue, kind of like the blood again, right? Think about it. When we were giving blood transfusion, A positive to O or A to B, that didn't work. A to B didn't work, right? We were having reactions. Also, we discovered, after we knew how to do the blood transfusion, we discovered that the blood needed to be tested for HIV, hepatitis C, etc. So that's what we are in the microbiome space. We see something, we see some signals. This mission is very expensive. Doctors have no idea. I wrote 61 clinical trial protocols to be able to do this. I spent millions of dollars of my savings, of savings essentially of my business, my clinical practice, that I turned around, that I put into my research because I felt this was important. And the problem is also, you cannot do research and make a profit out of it, because at the end of the day, it has to be heard by academicians. So if I'm portrayed as the girl that sells, my products or vitamins or whatever, then it takes away from the research, right? So I had to structure all that properly, like putting vitamins into a foundation, creating a foundation that basically does the research so that whatever research I come out with is given to humanity. What we saw with COVID were my patents, the hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pack, vitamin C, D, and zinc, that were given to the world to save humanity, right? I could have stopped all the doctors from using them and the pharmacists from writing them because I had the patent. But I felt the bigger mission was really saving humanity. And through the discovery, through the path of research, I discovered that humanity is going extinct. We're losing microbes at the speed of light. So it's my job to slow down the destruction of the microbiome. We're killing forests, we're killing the environment, we're killing the soil, we're killing humans. And so when you compare the diversity of microbes in the Amazon jungle to microbes in Africa, Zimbabwe, to microbes in America, completely different microbiome. And so my fear, because we saw from COVID, the worst response, the worst survival of COVID were in the Americans, right? We lost a lot of Americans during COVID. So that tells you that, with all the technology, with all the amazing, vaccines and everything, we still lost a lot of people. And I think we lost a lot of people because we've killed the microbiome of Americans. And that's where we're at.
I love your microbiome analogy with rainforests. I use that one a lot because lush rainforests they're vibrant, they're living, they provide life. There's a lot of symbiotic relationship.
Yes.
And unfortunately, and I heard you say microbiomes change from territory you live in. They can change from what your diet's like. And looking at that, so to me, that's where, like you said, your microbiome is almost like your own individual finger plant. I mean, it's your own, and that's a little bit what makes it a challenging. Now, you're into gut testing, and I know that. So explain to me where gut testing has got it right now, but where maybe we're not quite there, what like the norms look like. Explain that to me, because I know that's like right in your wheelhouse.
Gut testing is not there right now because they've not figured out the location where to look at, okay? And when I mean location, it's you have to have a validated assay. In other words, you have to repeat your stool sample over and over, and you have to get the same result with the same stool sample. That's a challenge. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to see signals. Also, most stool tests look superficially. When you're spending $300-400 on the stool test, that's very superficial look, okay? We go super deep into the microbiome, and we do a lot of testing to see if the microbes are alive. So in other words, I find a bacteria like Akkermansia. Is Akkermansia a good bug or bad bug? Is it alive in the gut or is it dead? Do you know how many people come to me, and you as a pharmacist, people come to me and say, I just did this test and I have on PCR, and PCR, we've all learned from COVID, is a piece of the microbe, right? And so people come to me and say, I had C. diff in my stools by PCR. And I go, and did you have diarrhea? No. So what happened? Well, I was given vancomycin. Now, vancomycin wipes out the gut entirely. Imagine what the patient had in his gut was a piece of C. diff that just was the waste, right? Because that's what we're testing is the waste, right? We're not testing what's in the cecum or the transverse colon or the sigmoid. We're testing the waste. So if the waste is a little piece of a microbe, are you going to treat that? Maybe it's just wasted. Maybe it was broken down. Maybe the patient doesn't have C. diff in the gut. Now you just assumed that the patient has C. diff. Based on a PCR that you tested once, you gave him vancomycin. Now you just wiped out his gut. And now you're growing the microbes that are bad in his gut. So do you see the problem? So, like I said, the challenge is the testing is not accurate. The second challenge is the depth of where we're looking at is not accurate. And then the third challenge is, what do you do with the data after you find it? Maybe the Akkermansia is a defense mechanism because you've lost a bunch of microbes, right? Maybe the Akkermansia that's elevated is your problem. Maybe it's actually doing something to counteract your aging process. Who knows? So we need to understand these microbes better before we start shooting down. When we start not wanting to look at poop and the miracles and understanding not selling poop. I'm not here to sell poop. I'm not here to sell fecal transplant. I'm here to understand the dynamics of the microbes so that I can fix the microbes by feeding them the right stuff instead. And it could be the right stuff is a consortium of microbes, right? Think about what we're doing with patients with hypertension, cholesterol. We're giving them a cholesterol pill, a hypertension pill. We're developing these consortiums, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a little bit of this microbe, a little bit of that microbe, a little bit of that microbe, but we're not there yet. And, you know, it might be in the future that pharmacies, the pH changed to pharmacy, you know, like the pharmacy, right? Because so much of these products, nutrients, are in the farm, the proper farming, the proper regenerative farm, the proper meat, the proper vegetable, the proper eggs. So I think we need to go back to basics and we need to relook at everything. You know, people believe that they live longer. I don't believe so much that we live longer. We definitely look better. You know, we've done so much to our faces and we know the technology now to look better. But I don't think we're living longer. I think the quality of life for a lot of people over 60 is really bad. There isn't a day where I don't see people, you know, you're in the bus, you're in the metro, and people are suffering. You know, they're shuffling, they're having tremors, they're having mental issues, they're having all sorts of issues. So I think we need to be, you know, sensitive about what we're doing to the planet and what we're doing to the microbiome of humanity and be more humble to look and to stop with the, you know, it's all about profit. Because let me tell you, you know, when you're making millions and you're sitting on the beach with a margarita, if you have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, you're not going to appreciate it. So it doesn't matter that you've got millions. You know, you want to have enough money to be resilient and to be strong and to continue whatever you're doing. We're not on this planet to gloat on ourselves. We're on this planet to help others that are less fortunate. You know, I'm very privileged. You know, regardless of all my challenges and my hard road, you know, every day is a challenge, but I'm still privileged, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, I get to do what I get to do to help people. Yesterday, 3 kids that I've been working with for like 2 to 4 months with severe autism, aggressive, used to run around my office like chickens without heads and screaming and basically not verbalizing, just like trying to make sound, just one vowel. And yesterday, you know, this one little girl said, "Slap me 5," and she slapped me 5, and she was just calm and lovely. Another little boy made me a marker for a book and said thank you and started singing happy birthday. And then another, and this was actually a kid that Mel Gibson had met at an airport and referred him to me. And so he sang happy birthday to Mel Gibson on the video. So, and then the third one was basically a kid that was just aggressive, older. And he used to come to my office wanting to spit on me. And he was very loud with noises and sounds. And he basically he said yesterday, Dr. Hazen likes calm and peace. And, you know, so it's lovely to see those kids respond, not be aggressive, you know, apologizing for being conscientious of their behaviors, you know. It's beautiful, you know, it's beautiful. And so I guess for me, the microbiome has taught me some things. It hasn't taught me everything, but I see some light and I keep following it. And I don't know where it's going to take me. Hopefully not the abyss. You know, I wrote the book, Let's Talk Shit, because I said I'm the first person to tell you, I could be full of shit or I could know my shit. Let's talk about it.
Right.
Why are we so, you know, scared to talk about things?
So in your book, Let's Talk Shit, you really went after ultra processed foods. And I thought about you yesterday when the FDA flipped the food pyramid and said, let's do healthy oils, let's do fats, let's do healthy fats, let's do good protein. And I thought about you. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's going to radically change microbiomes and gut health?
You know what? Thank God that, first of all, I hated that pyramid. The idea of eating 4 servings of pasta and bread was just ludicrous. That's like the number one way to gain weight, okay? Cut down the carbs. That's the first thing, okay? Bring on some substances like protein that gives you a lot more, calorie, more output than a piece of sugar that lasts in your system 5 seconds. When you eat a piece of sugar, and most people will know that, you eat a piece of sugar, right away you're hungry an hour later. You eat an egg omelet, you're not hungry for 4 to 6 hours. So what do I want if I want to lose weight? Do I want that bagel with cream cheese full of carbs, full of sugar? Or do I want that omelet that basically sustains me till for 6 hours? Because I could assure you, the bagel, you're going to be tired and you're going to be hungry because you're going to have that sugar flux and then you're going to crash. And that's usually what happens to people. So I think we had it all wrong. I think we need to start as scientists also. The best science, in my opinion, is going at it with brand new eyes and not being biased by anyone and assuming that everything is wrong. Okay. When I stepped into the microbiome, I literally looked at the microbiome and I said, everybody's different. How could there be a normal? If there's no normal, how could I, why am I in this situation of not understanding the microbiome? Because I assume that there's a normal. But let's remove the idea that there's a normal and let's start another way of looking at the microbiome. Let's look at the microbiome within the race, within the family. Let's look at the microbiome within the disease, within the unit, right? And then that became different for me. That's when I started seeing something. So, and it took a lot of years and a lot of research and a lot of testing back and forth with my eyes, not being biased. Do you know how many doctors and scientists come into your life and say, this is this, you got to go this way? I mean, just during COVID, everybody was giving me the protocol because I was the third person to post my protocol on clinicaltrials.gov on hydroxy, Z-Pack, vitamin C, D, and zinc. It was my patent, right? And so I was the first one to post it. And so everybody knew that I knew how to do clinical trials. So they all came at me with their little idea. Oh, you should try this drug. You should try this drug. I'm like, if you believe that this is the solution to COVID, write your protocol, do your research, and leave me alone. I wanted to stay like this, right? Because once you enter other ideas in your vision, you get messed up. And then it's all chaotic. Now, I have no problem in going this route. And then somebody comes in and says, hey, I see what you're doing, but I've seen this happen with my patients, and I think you should incorporate this. And the doctor shows me the data with his patients, right? Like I interview the patients. I say, did you improve? For example, I had a doctor that's from Miami that trained in the same residency program as me. She knows I'm working on Parkinson's with fecal transplant. And she called me and she goes, I just want to tell you, I've been doing this on patients with Parkinson's and it improves them. And so what happened was I started paying attention. I said, could you mind giving me a couple patients that you called, that you treated? So I did my own due diligence, right? And in fact, yes, she never published the data. It did work. So I became curious to say, you know what? These patients are improving. Let me try it on my patients. That's what research is about. Valid, verified, reproducible data that I can say with confidence, yeah, this doctor's right. It's so complex.
So what you just said is kind of thing. So we have to deal with genetics and we all this epigenetic stuff, but your microbiome is almost this variable that is so infinite. It's got so many infinite players that it's almost impossible because it isn't just organisms alive, organisms dead, concentrations, that kind of stuff. So I hear you on that.
Levels of organisms, yes. Balances of organisms.
Wow.
Where did that humans start off? I told you I'm from Morocco. Did I start off with a lot of E. coli? Is that part of my signature microbiome that I'm resilient to, right?
Right.
So and you don't have a baseline, right, of that. So it is, I feel sometimes like I'm Indiana Jones and the Temple of So that's what I feel like, It's basically in search of the microbe, in search of the disappearing microbe. I will tell you one thing that does alert me is this disappearance of bifidobacteria, because bifidobacteria was present in newborns, and now 75% of newborns do not have adequate levels of bifidobacteria.
Why is that strain so important? I hear you talk about that all. Can you explain why that strain is so important?
That helps absorb sugar, decompose sugar. That's the microbe that is your immunity in essence. That's your microbe that they discovered. And not me, not Sabine Hazen. I've been talking about it. I've been saying the process of aging is loss of bifidobacteria. But guess what? It was found in a 118-year-old woman in India. She still retained bifidobacteria. Probably it was dead at that point. But, the fact is she did have the fingerprints. So she's still harvesting it, right? And maybe that's what kept her alive. Who knows?
Very good. So I want to thank you so much for your time. Just one quick thing. If people want to learn more about you and the type of stuff that you have out there, because like you said, you've got some great COVID stuff with Bifido and all these other type of things. Where do they learn more about you?
Progenibiome.com. Progenibiome.com.
Awesome. Thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
Yes, I think you've really surprised and opened people's eyes up that there's this microbiome thing. It isn't a matter of taking a probiotic and moving on. There is so much more to it, and you really brought light today. And I just want to tell you thank you.